Hello ladies and gentlemen, this is Blue Maxima, and I'd like to talk to you for a bit about The Medium, which is the latest in the effort from Bloober Team to make sort of atmospheric, horror-ish titles. These are the same people that made Layers of Fear, Observer, what was the other one that they made? The Blair Witch one? That was just called Blair Witch. And they also made some absolutely terrible games in the form of Amen, and it's called Brawl now, but it was previously known as Basement Crawl, and it was rated terribly by a lot of people. And this one kind of sits in the middle, if I'm being honest with you. Actually, I'd rate it a fair bit lower than that, but we'll get into all of that, and there's no spoilers in this video, by the way. I won't spoil anything. There's a reason for that. We'll get into it. So, let's talk about the PC port, first of all, because I am playing this on PC. You might notice this video is in 30 frames a second, which is very unusual for this channel. That's because this game is really heavy on PC. I'm on an RTX 2080 and an i7 8700K, which should be above the recommended specs for 4K. Not 1080p, but 4K. And I can't get it to sit above 60 frames a second no matter what I do. I have most of the settings turned up as high as they'll go, but it still just doesn't run that great, even when I force lock it to 30, because every now and again, the game will stutter. You'll see the frame rate counter go down to 29, then up to 31, then back to 30, and you'll feel your inputs just go a little bit wobbly, because I don't think it's got very good frame pacing. I don't claim to know very much about the technical side of things, but this just wasn't very pleasant to play as a result, if I'm being honest with you. There are at least a fair few options that you have available to turn up and down at your leisure, but again, with that kind of frame pacing problems, I'd recommend you probably go a fair bit above what they recommend in the minimums, which is a 1650 and an i5 6600, which is a decent machine, at least these days, so woof. At least there are a lot of options, as I said, and it is stable. There isn't that much in the way of crashes or anything, but you will be waiting a long time for load times, especially if you frequently die, or you'll be waiting for textures to pop in a lot, because I played this on a hard disk drive, not an SSD, and I was seeing them all the time. Especially when you go to examine an object that's in a room that you've already been in for 2 minutes, and it takes a second for the texture to load in. I don't know what the deal is with that, but I guess they just haven't been very good at optimizing the way textures load in anyway. So let's get on to the story side of things. You are Marianne. You're a psychic. You're a stand-in for that dude who carries souls across the River Styx. Your father just died, and someone just called you to a long-evacuated resort, hotel sort of thing, filled with spooky things, and hijinks ensue. And that's basically all the story I can tell you, because up until like the 4-hour mark, which is admittedly about as far as I got, there was basically zero hint of what was really going on, and this game is apparently 8 hours long. So to drip feed you story details like that is just not particularly my cup of tea, if I'm being honest, because I needed a reason to stay engaged with this, because the main character sure didn't do it, and there was just nothing going for me here, because they give you nothing in the way of mainline story up until that point. All of it is told in these little collectibles that you find off to the side. These postcards, these letters, these diaries from people that are around the place. But they don't even give names to these people. So it'll be like diaries of a mentor, letters from a woman, something along those lines that gives you no idea just who it was that were sending these. And you'll be hearing like names come up in certain conversations throughout the first 4 hours. And you won't have any idea what the fuck is going on. And it starts to really get annoying after a while, because you have a lot of details, you're starting to put them together, but you still don't have any names to work with up until the game decides to drop just a really long, like, 5-minute cutscene, and then like a 20-something minute segment of another dude from another perspective in order to actually give you the story details that you need. And it feels so out of place in comparison to everything that there was up to this point. Also, really annoying thing about the way those collectibles work that actually let you learn a bit more about the story. The game doesn't let you know that you've missed something, and the game also doesn't have the ability to jump back to a previous chapter in order to grab something that you missed. You've only got a limit of like 8 autosaves, and that's it. And then, on top of that, in order to get all the achievements for the game, you need to go all the way through and find all those collectibles in one run. So if you missed one, not only are you not going to know where you missed it, but you're going to have to do it in one shot. Good luck. I mean, it's not too difficult because the game is extremely linear and it's actually pretty easy to see where they are if you're just constantly walking around the rooms of the walls, I should say, of every room that you walk into. But it's still quite annoying and it can make things kind of hard to spot. Now, none of this would be a problem for me in the first 4 hours if the main character was any sort of interesting whatsoever. But Marianne is just a tornado of unbelievability. I do not feel for her character in the slightest. So, her voice acting is really poor. There's a couple of times where she tries to show emotion and it sort of works, but the rest of it is just flat and uninteresting. So she says conflicting things all the time. Like, for example, the first time she ends up in the second world, it's like, oh, I've never seen anything like this before. What is this? And then she says, oh, I've seen things like this for years, ever since I was born, as like at the beginning of the game. And it just doesn't mesh together. There's a fair few statements like that just don't work. And she tends to be scared by things she shouldn't be and not scared by things when she should be. So, for example, when I said she pops into the other world for the first time and she's like, what the hell is this place? Despite the fact that she's not only seen it before in the game, but she's seen it before in her life. And then she sees this gigantic moth monster with destroyed wings that immediately proceeds to chase down and try and eat her. And she's not scared of it at first, until it tries to eat her. And there's a fair few things going along like this. And it's just like, what? You don't seem human. You seem the complete opposite of a reasonable human being, and it's amazing you haven't died yet. This is the sort of person who dies at the beginning of the horror. Well, she's like the second person to die. The first person to die is always the person who's like, something's not right, we should get out of here. The second person to die is just the stupid one. She's the stupid one. And they do dip in a little bit of mystery about her at the very beginning of the game. Like, the entirety of the intro is setting up her entire backstory and the reason for her to be going to the abandoned resort in the first place. But after the intro, nothing. No digging into her character, no extra backstory. It's just nothing but what is this place and where are we the entire way through. And if either her as a character or the location as a place actually worked for me, maybe I'd be able to deal with it. But neither of them do. So, yeah, I've got nothing. I was off the story by like 2 hours 30. And I still played for an hour and a half longer. So if that gives you an idea of me trying to give this game a chance, well, there you go. Alright, so let's dig into the gameplay. It's a walking simulator. No, not really, but it's an adventure/puzzle game with a lot of walking and, of course, a fair bit of horror. So here's the basic mechanics. You walk around, you examine objects, you combine objects sometimes, and you put them on places to solve puzzles. You do also have access to things like a shield and a blast to do also other puzzle-solving things. There's no real actual combat in this game, which I was a little worried about considering what it was supposed to be, but eh. And there's also the ability to sprint on the left trigger. You've got instinct, which will highlight interactable objects, and sometimes you'll need to use it to like see through an object to see if something's worth opening, although it's a bit weird because you need to use it to determine whether or not you can open a drawer because you can see that something's in there, which is bizarre to me personally, but okay. And you've also got the ability to sneak and hold your breath. That is basically the entirety of the game's mechanics. There is also it's a bit of a weird thing. The game's story shows you as a medium who can exist in two different worlds at the same time and sometimes transfer between them, but the rules are not only inconsistently shown, but it just works differently whatever part of the game you're playing because it's extremely linear. So there will be some places where you're controlling two people in the same viewpoint at once, and it looks kind of neat, but it's super linear. And you can hold the B button in order to walk along as the ghost version of yourself for a little bit, or there'll be one where you have to go to a mirror to swap back and forth between worlds. So that's entirely it for the game's mechanics. That's basically all that there's been up to about the 4-hour mark. And I'd like to list all the ways that this game kind of screws it up. So let's start with error number 1. Your basic walking speed is really fucking slow. There is no reason in this game for you to be as slow as you are, and considering that you can just hold the left trigger and just go along at a sprint 95% of the time, there is absolutely no reason you shouldn't, and the fact that they make your walking speed so slow is a real strike against it, because there is no reason to need to, never need to sprint, I should say. So I don't know why it's there to begin with. Error number 2 is some really obvious controller problems. I played this game on gamepad because that's what they recommend when they start the game up, and I'm not going to go against their wishes. So I played it on the gamepad. Kind of a bad idea. Reason number 1, it vibrates all the fucking time. No matter whether you're like in the rain, walking down certain surfaces, using your instinct in order to try to find things, basically anything makes your controller vibrate, so your controller will be vibrating more often than it won't be, and it's really frustrating to deal with. Also, instinct is on hold, so you have to hold the L1 button in order to use your instinct, which, as I said, highlights objects. But it also highlights stealth monsters, which is a thing in this game. In the real world, there's a stealth monster that can chase after you and kill you, so you need to hold the L1 button in order to see it. You also need to click in R3, because clicking in R3, or the right analog stick, will hold your breath, which is another thing you need to do for these things. So in order to see the monster, you need to hold L1. You also need to hold R3. You also need to walk with the left analog stick. Also, holding L1 makes your controller vibrate, so you have to do this while your controller is vibrating. Also, if you want to be sprinting while you're walking, while you're using your instinct, you have to be holding L1 and L2, which is immensely uncomfortable. Now, I will note that you can change the instinct and the hold your breath buttons to toggles instead of holds in the gameplay options, but I still think it's unacceptable that they were left on hold in the first place, because it is a really, really goddamn annoying thing that they're there, and that's just, yeah, I don't like those control decisions at all. Meanwhile, on the other side of things, having one button dedicated to regular world interactions and another button dedicated to other world interactions is actually a really neat idea, but they don't use it for anything. So I guess we can call that another thing to list under this error. Oh, also, you know how fixed cameras work in games like Resident Evil, where forward will put you in a direction, and then the camera switches, and then forward puts you in another direction? This game doesn't handle that very well, so have fun walking into another camera angle and realizing you have to readjust yourself on the stick to be going where you want to go. Also, if you think that this is an alright idea, they do it in chase scenes. As in, you're being chased by a big horrible monster and you need to be going in a specific direction in order to not die. It's not fun. So, error number 3. I was complaining about waste of time with error number 1 because of how slow you walk. There are also a bunch of other things that'll waste your time, and the one thing I think of the most is this one scene you have to go through where you have to hold down on the analog stick and wait very slowly for this knife to cut through this wall of skin so that you can pass through. You have to watch it for at least 3 times in the first 4 hours, and it takes at least 15 seconds. I don't know why they bother to make you watch the entire thing more than once, but I guess someone was just really proud of their skin flap opening, which is weird because after that, there's another bloody thing where you have to do this annoying QuickTime event where you press LT and RT multiple times together in order to use these bolt clippers or whatever the hell you call them to cut open locks, and the locks just disappear. They don't even bother having physics for them. So it's like, they really can't choose what looks good, what they should actually, like, let the player spend time looking at and what they shouldn't let the player spend time looking at. But either way, it ends up being even slower for the player, and it's really frustrating to deal with. Error number 4. It's a horror game, so it needs to be just generally unsettling, but of course it has to be cheap and it utilizes jump scares. And there's this one particular kind of jump scare that happens from time to time. And it's this one where the sound suddenly gets really loud, there's a flashing back and forth between perspectives, and then the perspective splits. So you've got yourself in the real world and yourself in the other world. And it hurts my eyes. If I'm being honest with you, it really hurts my eyes, and it's probably the reason why they had to put a, what'd you call it, a epilepsy warning at the beginning of the game, because it's literally that bad. It's worse than Cyberpunk than it was for me. Well, I won't say that, but it was close. It was really close from time to time, and when it happens really suddenly without warning, I can imagine someone getting really uncomfortable with that. It's entirely unnecessary. Especially when it's bad enough staring into this not very well rendered face doing this really pained scream. Error number 5. The game, the environment, and the puzzles are all entirely linear. The most you get is wandering around a single room at a time looking at certain objects, like on the wall, or finding these little objects that have these voice clips that you can find just by slowly turning the object around and finding the cut on them. And that's basically it. You basically go through the puzzles linearly. There's next to no backtracking, except if it's in the benefit of solving a puzzle. And it's not even remotely open in terms of the level design. So you can't go back to early areas of the hotel to do anything. You can't just like look around the place. It's really linear to the point of being really reductive to the way the game wants to handle its horror themes, and it's quite disappointing as a result. As to what I said about the puzzles themselves being linear, here's the thing about that. There's this one puzzle relatively early on in the game where you need to find out some dude's name in order to make sure that you can send him onto the afterlife. And it involves going to a room and finding where he sits in a room, and you find this little voice clip that says, oh, it's this dude named Boris who was sitting across from him. So you find the seat that Boris is in, find the seat that Nicholas was in, and you think, okay, I know that his name is Nicholas, I can go back. That didn't work. You have to very specifically watch this audio clip in a very specific way, then go to the list, find the name, Boris's name, then go to Boris's chair, then go to Nicholas's chair, then go back to the list to get Nicholas's name, and then she'll be like, Eureka! His name is Nicholas! And every single puzzle in the game is like this, where they have to be done step by step by step, otherwise they won't work. This gets really annoying around the 4-hour mark, around the puzzle where I gave up, where you've got a room of objects that are very obviously interactable, but you have to do them in a very specific order in order for the other objects to actually become interactable. So you have to start with the object on the left, then the object in the middle can become interacted with, then the one on the right can be interacted with. As I said, it's incredibly linear and it's very unsatisfying because you just don't feel like you've solved a puzzle, you just feel like you've followed a set of directions. That's probably the reason why the game looks so good. It is legitimately a really nice looking game, but the game's just general potential for being open and free to explore really spoils it. It really gets spoiled by that as a result. Error number 6. While the two perspective idea is really neat, it suffers from the linearity that the rest of the game has. So you will have to go back and forth between the dimensions or interact with objects in one dimension in order for the other dimension to be interactable for something else. But it's always so linear and so simple that I don't feel clever for having solved the puzzle in any way. I don't feel like, oh, Eureka, that's an amazing puzzle going on. I wish I had thought of that a little bit earlier than that. No, it's generally just really simple stuff, and it's an absolute waste of potential of this idea of having two different perspectives going on at the same time. And again, they cut away from it for a while. And there are times where they just kind of screw with the concept by changing the rules on you and then changing them back, and it just becomes a bit of a cluster as to what exactly this woman is able to do and when she's able to do it. It just doesn't feel like it makes any sense sometimes. Error number 7, and the last error that I have written down on this list. Forced, shitty stealth sections. I already hinted at that earlier on in this list, but they are very simple, they are slow, they are annoying, and I actually got stuck on the geometry once and I had to repeat it. Thankfully, the checkpoints are actually pretty close together, so it's not like you won't get thrown back too far, but it's still forced, shitty stealth sections, and if Spider-Man, a much better game than this, couldn't get away with having them, this game can't get away with having them either. And considering the fact that this game has also got some really long loading times, yeah, not great. So, after all of that, is there anything that I liked about the medium? I've just got my eyes closed right now and I'm trying to think back to all of the gameplay that I took of this, the 4 hours that I played it, and I'm just looking at it and I'm thinking, well, it looks pretty nice. And that's about it. I didn't really like this game at all, if I'm being honest with you. It's just got too much working against it. The puzzles are too simple. The concepts that I liked didn't have enough done with them. There's forced, shitty stealth sections. and the story just does not keep me entertained in the slightest, despite the fact that I was halfway through, and I should have had enough to keep me going until the end of the game by this point. So yeah, sorry Bloober team, you just didn't hit it right with this one. I didn't like it at all. Wouldn't recommend it at pretty much any price. It just feels like a waste of time. You know what's really weird though? The entire time I was playing through this game and thinking, you know, this two worlds concept sounds really familiar, and this whole just layout and concept sounds kind of strange as well. Where have I seen this before? And then I remembered. If you are a fan of Yancey Croshaw, you'll know that he's made adventure games back in his day, and the most popular one that he made before he moved on to make something like The Consuming Shadow turned out to be one called Trilby's Notes, which actually does a certain twist on this whole two worlds formula, and it's actually a fair bit more creative and actually more entertaining to play than this was. I'm not even joking. It looks like garbage by comparison, but he actually got a decent set of puzzles going. He actually got a decent way of doing the two worlds thing without making it feel contrived. And it helps that you can actually explore almost the entirety of the hotel, and by a certain point in the game, almost at will. So it feels even more free than this game. So you know what, Yancey Croshaw? Good job. You did better than a bunch of people with millions of dollars, assumedly. This has been Blue Maxima. I'll let you watch a little bit more of gameplay, but there's really not that much else to see, I hope. I hope I've edited this together properly. I'll see you all next time.
Let me try you on. Let me eat you up. It won't hurt. Not one bit. I'll eat you up, just like the others. All of her little friends.
I'm getting close. That woman was here. Oh. She was a ballerina? Nice card. Was Vivienne one of your stars?
Okay, last one. I can barely feel my wrist. I don't care. I just want to go to bed. I need to be alone.
This room has Guy written all over it. In big slop. There. That's her room. Someone couldn't even let her have her privacy. Vivienne? Just Vivienne? No. The artist formerly... Okay. Let's find out who you really were, Vivienne. Huh. A page was torn out. I can't make out the numbers. I guess one of these names belongs to your true self. But which one is it? I still don't know her real name. Just words. Sounds without meaning. This is where it happened. Of all the places.
You? What are you? No! Get out! Ah! No!
And still no name. There's gotta be something. Partial numbers. One of these must have meant something. There. A bunch of numbers, some would say. But I sensed there was a lot more to them.
Hello? Oh, hey, it's fine. I know you're busy. I'm busy too. Yeah, it's tomorrow. The big day. Yep. Thanks. I'll see you home. Kiss them for me, okay?
Not exactly a hotbed of passion.
Oh my God, Ellie! I thought you were... No, I'm really happy to hear from you. Why didn't you call sooner? You did? But... Eugene, that slippery son of a bitch.
Ellie. She was very special to her. You don't need to be a medium to see it. So, if you were talking to Ellie, Tori, it's you. The real you. That's your name. It made sense, really. A name is more than what everyone calls you. It's what you feel yourself to be. I'm not gonna lie, it felt good, putting that curse of mine to good use. Moments like that used to keep me going. Now, I'm not sure anymore. can be free now, Tori.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. One down, one to go. Better get to it.